In every home, parents strive to build a sanctuary, a safe and nurturing space where their children can grow, explore, and thrive without fear. However, hidden within the walls of this haven are often objects far more dangerous than any threat from the outside world. These items can pose serious risks if not properly managed. In this video, we'll share the story of one family's experience, a cautionary tale that serves as a reminder of how small oversights can lead to life-altering consequences. Together, we'll explore how to identify these hidden dangers and take simple but effective steps to protect your loved ones. Ethan, 10, and his older brother Lucas, 12, were two boys living in a home in a quiet neighborhood in Jackson, Mississippi. Their parents, Carter and Tasha Gamble, took great pride in their modest, well-kept house. The freshly painted shutters and neatly trimmed bushes spoke to their care, and the small yard, green and inviting, held a sturdy swing set beneath a young maple tree, along with colorful flower pots lining the porch. A weathered basketball hoop stood at the edge of the driveway, its frayed net a silent testament to years of backyard games. Inside, the warmth of the Gamble family was evident in every room. The living room, with its overstuffed beige sofa and quilt draped across the armrest, was a place for family movie nights and quiet evenings together. The coffee table, scattered with school books, board games, and magazines, was the heart of family life. Framed photos adorned the walls, capturing milestones like Ethan's Little League games, Lucas's school play, and family picnics at the lake. The kitchen, cozy and functional, bore the marks of a loving home. Wooden cabinets, a simple tile backsplash, and a calendar hanging on the fridge filled with reminders for appointments and birthdays. The air often carried the comforting scent of fresh coffee and cinnamon, a nod to Tasha's habit of baking on weekends when the kids helped measure and stir. Ethan and Lucas each had their own rooms, reflecting their distinct personalities. Ethan's room, painted his favorite shade of blue, was filled with action figures and a small desk for homework. Lucas's room, a teenage sanctuary, featured white walls covered with pictures of actors, wrestlers, and mementos. Despite the occasional sibling squabble, the boys often ended up in each other's rooms, talking about their dreams and plans late into the night. Tasha, balancing a busy job with the demands of raising two boys, ensured their home ran smoothly. The little details, fresh linens on the beds, a jar of homemade cookies on the counter, and her quiet moments of listening to her children revealed the depth of her care. It wasn't a fancy house, but it was one filled with love and stability, offering Ethan and Lucas a haven where they could grow and thrive. But in the blink of an eye, one small oversight changed their family forever. This is their story, a cautionary tale for every parent who thinks, "It could never happen to me." Lucas was a curious boy, always drawn to the forbidden. It wasn't that he wanted to cause trouble. He just couldn't resist the allure of a mystery. His father's stern warnings about the master bedroom closet had only fueled his imagination. "Stay out of that closet, Lucas. You know better," his dad had said more than once, his tone firm and final. But for Lucas, the off-limits nature of the closet was a challenge he couldn't ignore. What could possibly be so important that it needed to be locked away, he thought. One quiet afternoon, while his parents were out running errands and his younger brother Ethan was napping, Lucas saw his chance. He crept into the master bedroom, his heart pounding. The closet door stood slightly ajar, and he could see stacks of old showboxes and folded sweaters. He slid a box across the floor, uncovering a small brass key. His breath hitched. Could this be the key to the mysterious cabinet his father always kept locked? "What are you doing, Lucas?" Lucas spun around, clutching the key tightly. Ethan stood in the doorway, clutching his favorite toy truck, his 10-year-old face a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Nothing," Lucas said, quickly slipping the key into his pocket. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Doesn't look like nothing. I'll tell Dad." Lucas sighed, knowing his brother's tattling tendencies. "Okay, fine. I found a key. But you can't tell anyone, okay? It's our secret." Ethan tilted his head. "What's it for?" Lucas hesitated, then gestured toward the tall wooden cabinet in the corner of the closet. I think it's for that. Ethan's eyes widened. The one Daddy says we're never allowed to open? Lucas nodded. Exactly. Are you going to open it? Ethan asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Lucas's hand trembled as he fit the key into the lock. The click of the mechanism seemed impossibly loud in the stillness of the room. Slowly, he swung the cabinet door open and both boys stared in awe. Inside was a sleek black handgun resting alongside a box of ammunition. The gun's polished surface gleamed in the dim light and its presence filled the room with an unspoken tension. Whoa, Ethan breathed. Is that real? With the facade of a senior brother, Lucas whispered, "Of course it's real," before reaching out to touch it. The metal was cold and heavier than he expected. Holding it made him feel older, stronger, like the action heroes he secretly admired. Ethan tugged on his sleeve. "Can I hold it?" Lucas shook his head. "No way. You're too little." Ethan pouted. "That's not fair." "Life's not fair," Lucas said, placing the gun back in the cabinet. He locked it and slipped the key into his pocket. "Don't tell Mom or Dad, okay? It'll be our secret." Ethan nodded, but the mischievous glint in his eyes made Lucas uneasy. 2 days passed uneventfully, but the memory of the gun lingered in both boys' minds. For Ethan it was a mix of fear and fascination. For Lucas it was pure excitement. He had touched a live gun. On the 3rd day, Lucas was in his room when Ethan burst in, his face flushed with excitement. "I found the key," Ethan announced, holding it up triumphantly. Lucas shot to his feet. "What? How?" "It was still where you found it," Ethan said. Lucas snatched the key away. "You're not supposed to touch that. It's dangerous, Ethan." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "I just wanted to see the gun again." "Please, Lucas, just for a second?" Lucas hesitated. He knew it was a bad idea, but Ethan's pleading eyes wore him down. "Fine," he said reluctantly. "But you have to promise not to touch anything." Ethan nodded eagerly. "I promise." Lucas unlocked the cabinet and carefully pulled out the gun. The weight of it in his hands felt more ominous this time. He held it up for Ethan to see. "Cool," Lucas whispered, his eyes wide with admiration. "Yeah," Ethan agreed, though his voice lacked confidence. "Can I hold it now?" Ethan asked, his voice small but insistent. Lucas hesitated again. "I don't know." "Please?" "Just for a second," Ethan begged. Against his better judgment, Lucas handed the gun to Ethan, keeping his hands close in case he needed to grab it back. "It's heavy," Ethan exclaimed, shifting his grip awkwardly. "Be careful," Lucas warned, his voice rising with panic. "It's not loaded," Ethan said confidently. "I heard Daddy telling his friend he doesn't load his gun unless he's going to use it." Lucas frowned. "Sure?" "Sure," Ethan said, nodding. He handed the gun back to Lucas, who felt a strange mix of relief. Lucas tossed the gun into the air and caught it, mimicking the moves he'd seen in his favorite westerns. With a grin, he pointed it at Ethan. "When you have to shoot, shoot. Don't talk," he said, imitating Clint Eastwood's iconic line. Thinking the gun was not loaded as Ethan had assured, he pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot was deafening. Ethan fell to the ground, his toy truck clattering beside him. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Lucas stared in shock, the gun still in his hand, smoke curling from the barrel. "Ethan?" Lucas whispered, dropping the gun and rushing to his brother's side. "Ethan!" Ethan's eyes fluttered open, but they lacked their usual spark, dim and unfocused. His breathing was shallow, each ragged breath a struggle to fill his lungs. Blood pooled around him, staining the floor in dark, unforgiving patches that seemed to grow with every passing second. Lucas's hands shook violently as he pressed them against his brother's wound, trying desperately, yet futilely, to staunch the flow of blood. "You're going to be okay," he whispered in tears, his voice barely a tremor. "You have to be, Ethan. Please, you have to be okay." But as the seconds ticked by, it became clear that his brother wasn't going to make it. The light in Ethan's eyes faded, his breathing more shallow, the blood no longer slowing. Lucas left Ethan, his heart breaking as he looked over his brother one last time. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the roar of his own panic as he sprinted toward the door. He ran to the neighbor's house, his legs burning from the frantic pace. "Ethan, my brother, he's dying." "My dad's gun," he shouted, breathless. "Please help us." His voice cracked with desperation as the weight of what had just happened overwhelmed him. The neighbor, a woman who had watched them grow up, without a word grabbed her phone and followed him back toward the house. The next few hours were a blur of sirens shouting and tears. Paramedics rushed into the house carrying Ethan on a stretcher. Lucas watched helplessly as his brother was loaded into the ambulance, his parents' frantic voices barely registering in his mind. At the hospital, the doctors worked tirelessly to save Ethan. Hours passed, each one heavier than the last. Lucas sat aside in the waiting room, tears streaming down his face. He couldn't stop replaying the moment in his head, the sound of the gunshot, the look of pain on Ethan's face, the blood on his hands. How could this happen? His mother sobbed, breaking the silence. His father's face was ashen. "I thought the cabinet was enough. I thought." His voice trailed off, filled with regret. Lucas wanted to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. He could barely look at his parents' faces. The heavy burden of guilt and disappointment pressed down like a mountain on his young shoulders. His mind raced with desperate prayers for Ethan to be okay, for this to be just a bad dream. Moments later, a doctor appeared, his expression grave. "Ethan is stable," the doctor began. Relief washed over Lucas, but it was quickly overshadowed by the doctor's next words. "He'll need surgery and it's going to be a long recovery. But he's a strong boy." Lucas' heart felt heavy as he waited in the hospital. Every sound, every movement felt amplified. Hours later, a nurse came out to inform them that Ethan's surgery had gone well and he was in recovery. The relief was palpable. For the first time, Lucas's mother embraced him, tears streaming down her face. "Thank God," she whispered. When Ethan finally awoke, he was groggy but stable. Lucas sat by his bedside, his heart filled with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," he said, barely able to meet his brother's eyes. Ethan managed a weak smile. "It's okay, Lucas. We're okay." 2 days later, a police officer visited their home to discuss what had happened. "Mr. and Mrs. Gamble," the officer began, "we see cases like this far too often. A child gets hold of a gun and a tragedy occurs." "But the cabinet was locked," Carter said weakly. "Yes, but the key was accessible," the officer replied. "And the gun was loaded with the safety off. Those factors made it easy for this to happen." Carter buried his face in his hands. He didn't remember what he did last with the gun. "I thought I was being careful." The officer nodded sympathetically. "You're not alone. Many gun owners believe a locked cabinet is enough. But kids are smarter these days. So guns need to be stored unloaded with ammunition kept separately. And keys should be hidden where children can't find them." The days that followed were filled with silence and grief. Tasha couldn't look at Ethan without crying. Carter barely spoke. Lucas mostly stayed in his room, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. If only he hadn't opened the cabinet. If only he'd not opened the closet. If only his dad had stored the gun more safely. The weight of guilt was unbearable. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's recovery was slow but steady. Lucas visited him every day, bringing toys and reading stories, trying to fill the hospital room with as much love and support as he could muster. Ethan's spirit, though tested, remained resilient. One afternoon, their father sat with Lucas in the hospital cafeteria. The weight of the past weeks was evident in his eyes. "Lucas," he began softly, "we all make mistakes. The important thing is that we learn from them and never repeat them." Lucas nodded, tears welling up. "I promise, Dad. I'll never touch anything dangerous again. And I will never touch anything you or Mommy asked me not to touch." His father gave a small, sad smile. "I believe you. But we also need to take responsibility. I've made changes at home to ensure something like this never happens again." As Ethan finally returned home, the family embraced a new normal. Ethan and Lucas grew even closer, their bond strengthened by the ordeal they had endured together. The incident profoundly changed their family. Carter took drastic steps to secure the house, removing all firearms and ensuring nothing dangerous could be easily accessed again. He also enrolled Lucas in a safety course, hoping to instill a deeper understanding of responsibility. Years later, as Lucas grew into adulthood, he often reflected on that day. It had shaped him in profound ways, teaching him the value of respect to boundaries and caution. While the memories of the past never faded, they served as a constant reminder to him to make better choices. In the end, the key that changed everything also unlocked a future where the family grew stronger and closer, understanding that sometimes the most important lessons come from the hardest experiences. Thanks for watching. We hope this story has inspired you to take a closer look at the hidden risks in your home and take steps to create an even safer environment for your family. Remember, small changes can make a big difference. If you found this video helpful, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more valuable stories and tips. Together, let's make every home a true sanctuary. See you in the next video.